What it takes to heal trauma is the discussion on today's Soul Sovereignty and Sexuality podcast with myself, Jessica Falcon, international soul healer and embodiment guide. Excited to dive deep into an overview of what it takes to heal trauma, because healing trauma is specific to each unique individual. And there is no one size fits all approach. However, if we look at trauma from a bigger perspective, we can start to see the energy that is required to heal it. I work with clients from around the world, women and men, that are ready to heal deep-seated trauma. This can include soul trauma from past lives, in addition to trauma that you've experienced in this life or inherited from your ancestors, for example. And this process takes time. It is a powerful way to reclaim your power. When you heal from trauma, you are in the process of reclaiming your power back from what you experienced. And you're returning that power to you. You're bringing it back inside of you so that you can stand in your sovereignty, so that you can experience freedom, so that you feel free to be all of you fully expressed. There are different types of trauma. There is no comparison. What we do know about trauma is that it's stored in the nervous system. And so there is a lot out there around healing the nervous system. I myself teach trauma-informed nervous system-based yoga. I do a lot of practices with my clients around that. And what we have to understand, particularly from a soul perspective, is that your nervous system is an electromagnetic system. You are not bound by it. In fact, your consciousness, your energy, your heart is what can change and create shifts in your nervous system. Your heart is the biggest electromagnetic field of your body, right? So as you anchor into your heart, you cultivate the feelings of love, for example, you can literally shift your nervous system out of old states and patterns. Now, last week I did an episode specifically on shifting out of the old into the new. This is more tailored to the healing of trauma specifically. So go back to last week if you haven't already listened, if you want that particular approach. When trauma is stored in the nervous system, I like to think of it or visualize it this way. So imagine it like a tube. Imagine the nervous system like a tube. And you have a traumatic experience in which you've suppressed an emotion or been unable to be present through it. Talk more about that in a minute. That gets pushed down into that tube. You have a tube that, if there's a lot of trauma, gets full and full and full and full and full if it's not being healed, if it's not being met with presence and love and consciousness. So the tube gets really full. So what happens is the nervous system gets overwhelmed. And anything in the external environment, because the tube is already full, can make the tube explode, which is why you can feel extra anxious, extra tired, extra overwhelmed, even if it might not be overwhelming to the person next to you, because that person's tube isn't clogged, and so it's not going to explode over or fall or come up and out because it's empty. The nervous system feels clear. It's not overloaded. So that thing that triggers you doesn't trigger them, right? Into overwhelm. And so what we want to do is we want to take out all the things that are clogging that tube. We want to take it out. Now, this is not about getting rid of trauma. Whenever I hear people, which is very common and I understand it, believe me, say, I just want to get rid of this, it's understandable. And we don't want to get rid of it. We want to heal it. We want to bring it into wholeness. We want to receive the wisdom of it. Because like it or not, everything you experience, particularly trauma, is for a reason. The soul path is mysterious. The soul path is multidimensional. The soul doesn't drop you into those experiences for no reason at all. We are constantly in a state of uncovering deeper aspects of ourselves. And when we sit with trauma consciously, when we open up to see what's in that tube of your nervous system, you can heal on multidimensional levels because it's all energy. We are energetic beings. The nervous system is energetic. Your heart is energetic. The emotions that you've suppressed or oppressed are energy in motion. Your thoughts are energy. They all have a frequency. They all have a vibration. They're all emitting sound, even if you don't hear it. So if we look at it, right, from this higher perspective, and you want to clean out this tube, well, in order to receive the wisdom, not just get rid of it, in order to actually come into wholeness and bring those parts of you back that have experienced trauma, you've got to open your heart to create that electromagnetic field, and you have to receive it all with an open heart. I would say love. You don't have to love what happened to you. That's not what I'm saying. So that's where it gets confusing. But the frequency of the heart is what allows and creates the capacity for all that's in that tube to come up and be seen and be witnessed and be held so that it can magically dissolve and create transformation within. Trauma is essentially when we disconnect. It's the result of disconnection. When we disconnect from a part of ourselves, when we disconnect from the pain of an experience. So rape, for example. When somebody is raped, when they are touched without consent in that way, when they are basically unseen, they become invisible, and that person is just taking from them. What often happens is that the person then dissociates during the experience because it's shocking. They might go numb. Maybe they try to flee or fight. They might have parts of themselves that just vacate the body. They might feel powerless. They might feel so much fear in addition to the shock, shame, guilt, all the things. And they may not have the capacity in that moment to process it all because of what's happening. And so if it's not consciously met and processed right after, to bring those parts back into wholeness, to be seen, to process the anger, to process the grief, to process all of the emotions that come with that, to bring the presencing back into the body, back into all parts of the body with love, with acceptance, to release the shame and the guilt and all of those things that are energy that are then created by that experience. Then they're going to remain disconnected, and then this tube is being filled and creating more tension in the system. Because trauma is disconnection, we have to reconnect in order to come back into wholeness. So disconnection, trauma, to reconnection, wholeness. This is the overarching, very simplistic way of looking at it. But I think when we bring things down to the root and the simplicity, we have a better understanding of what is required to address it, right? When we make things too complicated, ego loves to complicate things. When we make things too complicated, we also keep ourselves in cycles, and we're not able to energetically shift into a new state of being. In order to do this, disconnection to reconnection, to heal trauma. It is essential, imperative, cannot stress it enough, that you first develop witness consciousness, the capacity to observe what is happening inside of you, a thought, an emotion, a feeling, an experience, without identifying with it. So much of the work I do is helping my clients release the ways in which we unconsciously or consciously identify with things outside of us, to come back into the true self, the divine self, and then bring that forward into how you live and create your life as a divine being, as a powerful being. If you cannot yet have this part of you that is sitting back and observing you, your thought, experience, words, and you have not yet developed the capacity to heal the trauma. Because in order to heal the trauma, you have to be able to sit back and observe it as energy, as an experience, as an emotion, and not attach to it, not identify with it, not cling to it, not make it yours. Because if you're doing any of those things, it's not going to move, and the tube stays full. If you were clinging to it, identifying as a victim, if you were clinging to that righteous rage and anger and not willing to let it go, if you're clinging to blame, if you're clinging to a feeling of powerlessness, guess what? It's not gonna move, and you're not gonna heal the trauma. No matter what you think you're doing, you can shake all day long in TRE exercises, and you're still not going to heal that trauma because you're not letting the energy move. Got it? Really important. And I say this with a lot of compassion. It might not sound like it, but I'm saying it with a lot of compassion, because what grieves me is seeing a lot of people, quote, heal trauma, but bang their head against the wall because they're staying in the cycles, because they're not actually releasing the trauma. They're continuing to identify it. This is when you, for example, hear the same story repeated over and over and over. When clients come to me and just want to say the same story, I immediately stop them, and we go into the body, and we go into the heart, and we go into the presencing, and we touch the energy so that you can shift it energetically, so that you can shift it emotionally, so that you're no longer carrying it around as baggage. You're no longer carrying it around as a burden. You actually separate yourself from it to create union with the true you, and let that trauma, that experience, that emotion, that belief leave you. It's not yours. It doesn't belong to you unless you make it belong to you by identifying with it. Okay? I say this because I want you to heal your trauma, because I want to support you to heal your trauma in this conversation, whether you work with me one-on-one or not. I want you to know that it's possible to experience a brand new version of you. The one that is the true you, the empowered you, the sovereign you, the sensual you, the sexual you, particularly an example of rape. What often happens is that when that has been taken or used or abused by another, that person, I'll say a woman, for example, can then shut down her life force, can then disconnect from her womb, can disconnect from her yoni, can disconnect from her own desire, can disconnect from her own choice, can disconnect then from her sexuality. So the process of reclaiming your sexuality includes healing from trauma, coming back into touch with all of those things. The desire, the choice, the womb, the yoni, all of it. Again, through the lens of the heart, because what reconnects the heart? The heart creates union. Trauma is disconnection, separation, dissociation. heart union, reconnection. It reunifies. It brings you back into wholeness. So if you're doing any of this work without the heart as the primary focus, receiving everything in love and acceptance, again, you're not going to heal the trauma. Your nervous system does not control you. The one observing your nervous system have that is the one that is actually in choice. The one that is observing your nervous system respond to overwhelm, that one witnessing, observing is the one in power, not the nervous system or the reaction itself. You can observe yourself have a reaction or a trigger and breathe into it and shift out of it and heal that. We must first develop the capacity to witness and observe. So how do you do that? For those of you listening that haven't already developed that capacity. Meditation. Presencing in the body. Observing and coming into the awareness that I am not my thought. It takes time and it takes development of the prefrontal cortex, which is where the third eye is, right? Between the eyebrows and the forehead, the prefrontal cortex. We have to move out of the reptilian brain, which is the back of the head, which is, of course, right, a lot of the nervous system response, the primal response, the animal response. We have to move out of this and reconnect it to the prefrontal cortex. You want them connected. You don't want one or the other, right? We are both. But we want to reconnect. Pineal is actually in the center. Go figure. So we want to reconnect these parts of self and develop our prefrontal cortex, which develops the capacity to observe, to separate from the experience or the emotion, which is what allows you to clear out that tube, that nervous system, to create that freedom so that you are not then limited by it or stuck to it. Okay? Now, what happens is that if you do all this clearing of space, right? You're clearing that tube, you're consciously receiving the wisdom of these emotions, you are detaching from an identity of the person who was abused or raped, for example, or experienced that trauma. You're providing that love and acceptance, and you're transmuting and transforming that energy, whether it be through the support of a guide or you're developing the capacity to do this on your own. Hard sometimes to do this on your own because you don't always see what you don't see, and it can be really easy to get stuck in patterns and cycles of thought. Once you're creating that energetic space, once you're doing the emotional work, one of the key pieces then is that the mind, even though the energy is not there, the mind can sometimes still attach to a habit or an old belief or an old thought. And then the continuing work, once the energy is released, once the emotions are released, is to catch yourself having that same thought, is to catch your mind when it wants to go to an old story. Because there's no more energy, there's no more energetic weight attached to it, but the mind has to be retrained into the new. That's where last week's episode might be helpful, okay? But you have to catch yourself having the old thought and replace it with a new one, okay? So for example, and this is just a very broad example, very, very broad, but in that if somebody was raped and one of the consistent repetitive thoughts that was developed is, people don't honor my choice. Well, they're carrying that into how they show up in relationship, into how they show up in life or at work. And it might even have become a pattern in which that person then doesn't even express what they desire because, quote, no one ever honors their choice. And so the work after the clearing of the energy and emotions, after the clearing of the tube, is to align the mind to that new free state and to retrain the mind to believe, to know that people do honor my choice, for example, and then create the emotions of that to heal the wound of that not happening, to create the emotional knowingness and beingness of that truth. People want to hear me. People want to hear my truth. People want to honor my choice. And not let the mind stay in its old cycle of thinking the opposite, the old pattern. Okay. So that's why I consider it very important to not rely on talk therapy, for example. Though I do talk with my clients and we do coaching work, I'm not a licensed counselor or therapist. This is from a soul perspective and a body perspective. It is imperative that not be the only thing, because we've got to move the trauma, its energy, out of the system energetically and emotionally and somatically. And they're all connected because you are all of the above, and mentally. And if you leave out any of these parts, it might not fully release itself. So just trying to heal the story. I know I experienced this when I was doing a lot of healing of trauma. I got to a point where I felt I understood it in my mind and I felt clear in my mind, but my body was not clear. And my body was still holding on to the trauma because I had talked and talked and talked, did a lot of talk therapy, and it didn't heal the body. It didn't get the energy out or the emotions out or the somatic release. It didn't heal it there. And so I felt disconnected from the neck down because there was a disconnect between my mind and body. And so that's why we have to address them simultaneously, work on the emotions and the beliefs together because they're intertwined anyway. So why separate them? We do this through the heart by aligning to your soul truth, aligning back to love so you embody that new, free you. It's no longer stuck in the past. It is fully in your power. And if you want support with this, I would love to support you in one-on-one sessions, a portal of transformation to unleash your own sacred sovereign power, which includes healing all of this and transmuting it. So you can go to thepathtosovereignty.com and check out the website, what it looks like to work with me one-on-one. And I offer everybody a free 30-minute sovereignty breakthrough session. And I would love to offer that to you. I'll put it in the show link below as well. Lots of love.